Hello everyone, my name is Arianna Cañete, and today I'm going to talk to you about one of the most important problems in British society, football violence, which is known as hooliganism. But what does hooliganism mean? According to the Cambridge Dictionary, a hooligan can be defined as a violent person who fights or causes damage in public places. The most widespread theory on the origin of this term, although it lacks empirical support, it refers to the existence of a man called Patrick Hooligan, of Irish origin, who lived in London at the end of the 19th century. This gentleman was characterized by being lazy, drinking constantly, and picking fights with anyone who crossed his path, which brought him certain fame in the city. As a result, his surname began to be used to refer to all those who acted like him, and the newspaper The Times created the term hooliganism to describe the actions of young men who acted in a similar way to this man. Now, talking a little bit about the history of violence in football, this first appeared in 1960, although its origins can be tracked back to the 13th century in England. It was not until the late 20th century that it spread and came to public attention. Thanks to several intersecting factors, such as the beginning of the televising of football matches, the rise of violent patriotism towards immigrants, and the rise of counterculture youth protest movement, in 1960 was the year in which English hooliganism began to take place in the United Kingdom history, and the spontaneous outbreaks of violence that occurred among sports spectators began to be organized by different groups of fans. The phenomenon of hooliganism made its first appearance at the 1966 World Cup in England. There, fans of the English national team began to chant offensive chants at the opposing team, to throw objects onto the pitch, and to cause numerous disturbances. However, it seems that the motivation for such behavior had nothing to do with football, but rather with the malaise of a large part of the working class. This arose thanks to the industrialization that existed at the time and the asphyxiating labor regime to which they were subjected. In this sense, alcohol and violence were the means used by these young workers to vent the frustrations of their daily lives. From this moment onwards, in England in the late 60s and during the 70s, what is known as firms emerged, a term used to identify the group of hooligans of a team. At that time, there was a certain social tension that's the result of racial problems, which would explain why many of these firms had racist connotations. In addition, the country was immersed in a process of industrialization that directly affected the working class, and it was the time when a large part of the youth subcultures appeared. These subcultures are known as the mods, which is the abbreviation of modernists, the rude boys, and the skinheads. The latter, the skinheads, were the young working class youths who distinguished themselves by their very specific clothing. They wore heavy black boots, braces, rolled up jeans, and most importantly, a clean shaven head. This subculture was born to recover the virile and tough working class look that had been lost with the birth of the mods and the hippies, as this acquired in the eye of the skinheads habits of refinement and weaknesses that were not characteristic of the working class. For them, masculinity and physical strength were the best way to represent the working class, and violence was the ideal means to achieve this. So this last group, the skinheads, are the ones who would start the hooligan movement as it's known today. Now, when talking again about the firms, well, the firms in their beginnings lacked organization. They were groups of friends, neighbors, relatives, and workaholics who formed alliances to confront rival supporters. On the football pitch, these groups were placed at the end of the pitch, of course, behind the goal, and that was their territory, which they had to protect at all costs, while the other hand where the rival supporters were. that was the end that had to be attacked, and the invasion of the rival end was a cause for fame in the hooligan environment. So at first, the violence was only inside the stadium, but gradually it moved outside as the police and clubs of football set up controls to try to contain the violence. This meant that the firms acted in an increasingly organized and planned way, albeit largely informally, as they only held meetings in the pubs they frequented and passed messages between their members. Secret messages, of course. At least this was the case until the late 1970s, after which what the Latecaster sociologists, would call the super hooligans would appear. So this name, super hooligans, was developed as a result of the evolution of firms in the early 80s to circumvent police and club controls to carry out their violent actions in a more organized and therefore more effective way. Now I'm going to explain one of the most important tragedies in the United Kingdom, which is the Hazel tragedy. Hooliganism was in vogue. Many young people wanted to be part of it as they found in these groups an identity. So they felt part of something and they could vent their frustrations through violence. For many, it was a way of life, but then an event occurred that was the turning point for hooliganism in the UK. On May 20 of 1985, the final of the European Cup was played in the Belgian city of Brussels at the Hazel Stadium, where the Liverpool and the Juventus faced each other. For this event, numerous Liverpool hooligans traveled to Belgium. So an hour before the game started, the Liverpool hooligans tried to invade the area of the Juventus supporters to attack them. And when they tried to flee, they caused excessive pressure against one of the containment fences of the stadium, and this one collapsed, causing a human avalanche that buried the spectators there, leaving a total of 39 deaths. And this tragedy, of course, caused the UEFA to take exemplary measures against the British football, preventing all English teams from participating in European competitions for 5 years, except Liverpool, of course, whose duration of punishment would be of 6 years. At that time, then, the image of England was badly damaged by the tragedy of the British government. And the British government decided that it was time to act. So the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, announced the implementation of measures to eradicate or at least minimize the action of the hooligans in the stadiums. And one of these measures was the incorporation of a closed-circuit camera system that would allow the most dangerous hooligans to be identified. So together with the creation of new laws, such as the Public Order Act in 1986, that prevented hooligans already condemned from entering the stadiums and attending international matches, they managed to reduce the violence of hooligans in English stadiums. However, during the late 80s, a period called Second Summer of Love occurred in the United Kingdom. During this period, the violence of the hooligans was tempered by the arrival in the UK of two key elements from Ibiza: MDMA, well known as ecstasy, and acid house. So acid house is a style of music that first appeared in Chicago in the mid-1980s, and it was created by producers such as DJ Pierre, Future, or Fairly Jackmaster Funk. And it's a subgenre of house music that mixes the squelchy sounds and deep bass line of the Roland TB-303 synthesizer. And at the beginning of the movement, acid house parties were supposedly considered illegal, actually, as they took place in abandoned factories, in fields of the outskirts of the city, and warehouses. So to accommodate, this was to accommodate large crowds of people. And also there was a lot of illegal drug use. However, as time went by, and with the help of many DJs and bands of this subgenre of music, acid house made its way to the nightclubs. But what stands out from these years is how the violence of the British football hooligans disappeared from the football grounds. Between 1988 and 1989, hooligans found in ecstasy a more powerful adrenaline rush than the one they got on the football pitch. And thanks to rave, acid house, and ecstasy, young people created associations, and there were no rivals on the dance floor, and no matter your race, class, political ideas, or football team. So, however, everything came to an end, of course, and this pacification of hooliganism was cut short by several factors. The first one is the intense police concern over drug use, as ecstasy's son began to share the stage with cocaine, and violence began to flourish again. And also on the football scene, English teams would return to Europe in the early 1990s as the Premier League would be founded, and hooliganism would resume its old habits to this day. In the 70s, and thanks to the media, the incident of the English fans began to resonate internationally, and an example of the contagion of this English disease can be observed in several European countries. For example, we have the tifosi in Italy, we have the supporter in France, then we have the neo-Nazis in Germany, and then we have the ultras of Spain. Now I'm going to talk about the 2016 European Football Championship. Well, concerning the solutions implemented by the British government to eradicate this problem in the UK, this have served, if not to eradicate, at least control it. So many European countries have taken the country's measures as an example, as violence in football was beginning to be a cause for concern, and it seems that in this way, the crime figures linked to the phenomenon are being kept at acceptable levels. So while it is true that the measures have worked to control violence within England, there are still conflicts when it comes to international events. In these cases, situations of violence are even more alarming when it comes to major international tournaments, such as the 2016 football tournament in France. So although it is believed that hooligans have been appeased, it is at these major events that English hooligans are seen again. So in Europe, this is thanks to the free movement of the European Union residents. This European Championship will go down in history more than for football for the appearance of new formations of ultras from Eastern European countries, mainly Russians. So for a large part of the tournament, these groups, the Russian ones, engaged in physical conflict with supporters from other countries, especially the English. So the violence between these groups of fans, it was a real headache for the French authorities, who were overwhelmed as they had focused their efforts on containing the English hooligans. So the traditional threat of football events. Moreover, due to the increase in jihadist attacks that year, the French authorities were forced to divide their attention and prevent Islamist attacks between this and football hooligans. Also, this left the way open for these emerging ultras, the Russians, to unleash their violence with little impediment. The situation reached such a point that the FIFA itself considered expelling the Russian Federation from the championship if the violence of its fans didn't stop. What's most alarming and striking of all were the videos that subsequently surfaced showing the Russian ultras training fighting skills to come to the event even better prepared as if it were a war. So in this sense, we can see the next step in the evolution of hooliganism, which also seems to be entering the world of new technologies, as is the case with a large part of criminal behavior. It can also be observed that the preparation and dedication of these new hooligans for confrontation are beginning to be almost professional and extremely organized. Finally, we can conclude several points. The first of them is that the term hooligan is therefore not a modern term, but has been around for centuries and is a result of an individual's fondness for alcohol and violence. It can be noted too that as the football clubs grew and police forces hardened, violence moved from onto the pitch. As for the period of so-called peace in the world of football, at a time when football was at its worst because of the negative ideas that attracted its spectators, ecstasy and acid house quickly gained great popularity. A lot of young hooligans realized that you cannot do violence to a group of people you were just hugging and with whom you were dancing and singing on the dance floor. So the rivalry took a backseat and it was replaced by fun and a feeling of freedom. All in all, through the above information, hooligans spread through Europe like a virus. On the continent, it had been internalized that in the countries in a different way. So in the original model, the English one, what matters most is violence, and this is shown as the conquest of territory. The struggle of a group to dominate their opponents and reaffirm their virility before another group who are followers of another team. So this dominance is demonstrated by conquering their background or attacking the rival group before entering the stadium so that it is known who dominates that territory. It's actually a symbolic war ritual violence whose ultimate aim is not to kill the enemy but to humiliate him, although it is true that on some occasions it can lead to death. It is also important to note that the importance of the Hazel tragedy for the spread of hooliganism in Europe. In England, it led to the creation of measures to eradicate violence in stadiums, but internationally, violence associated with football matches is a common occurrence that usually takes place before matches. So, as for violent tendencies, it's important to recall that not all hooligans are as violent, but in recent years there has been numerous clashes between hooligans and rival fans, even to the point of breaking them up in different sports clubs and preventing them from entering matches. So most of the fans belonging to this group of ultras usually have no political ideology. However, some hooligans consider themselves to be of the extreme right, extreme left, or anti-establishment political ideology. So they tend to associate with those who belong to the same ideology and fight with those who belong to the opposite ideology. As for the impact of hooliganism, even on an international level, one cannot fail to comment on the Euro 2016 football tournament. Because English hooliganism has had such resonance at the international level that the Russians ultras took them as an example and wanted to confront the English. So they prepared and psyched themselves up to hunt them down in France. But finally, it can be concluded that hooliganism is a phenomenon that is constantly evolving. Moreover, it does not develop in the same way in all societies. And nowadays, hooliganism is no longer part of professional football, but it has mutated to the point where it is present in minor league football matches, even in children leagues. When talking about a personal approach of this work, sports, more than an activity between rivals, is an activity of people, teams, in which there should be an atmosphere of festivity, fun, fellowship, and effort. There's no need to attack and make it clear that there is supposed superiority. Throughout the work, it has been observed, moreover, that among the violent movements, there are almost no women present, if not non-existent, of course. So this means that violence is, once again, a male-only activity. Thus, A real final conclusion to this work can be drawn that hooliganism is nothing more than a way for men to demonstrate strength and virility that is associated with the macho nature of society. Therefore, it is more than unnecessary violence, which does not do nothing more than provoke disaster and misfortune, like everything that's associated with sexism today. Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation.